Let me be your servant, let me be as Christ to you. Pray that I may have the grace to let you be my servant too. We are pilgrims on a journey, we are travelers on the road. We are here to help each other walk the mile and bear the load.
Last time we did a quick review of the first two chapters of Ruth to kind of put things back in perspective. I also reminded you about the Jewish law concerning the kinsman redeemer and the tradition of the levirate marriage. The levirate marriage was really intended to keep family legacies intact. The thing was that if you had a brother who married a woman and he died before she had a son to carry on the name, you then would take her and marry her and father a child in your brother's place, and that child would carry on your brother's name. Under the law, the widow had the right to hold the brother-in-law to that particular duty. If he refused, she could call him to a town meeting in front of a crowd of witnesses. She could publicly shame him. The shame consisted of removing the sandal from his feet and then spitting in his face, and thereafter he would be known as the one whose sandal was removed. It was in that context that the story we're looking at this morning takes place. Naomi has instructed Ruth to go to Boaz and claim him as her kinsman redeemer. And she told Ruth to do 7 things when she got to where Boaz was. Well, in preparation for going. First, she was to take a bath. She'd been working in the fields all day, so she needed to get cleaned up. Second, she's put on some perfume. Third, she was to get dressed, and probably what this indicates is that it's time to put off your mourning clothes, your widow's robes. It's time to dress in normal clothes. And then number 4, go to the threshing floor where Boaz will be sleeping tonight. Number 5, watch where he goes to bed. Number 6, once he's asleep, slip down by him and uncover his feet. And then number 7, you just lay down and wait to see what he tells you to do. And all of that sounds so bizarre to you and I. And we sit there and think, what kind of thing is going on here? Well, what kind of thing is going on here is the kind of thing that happened in ancient Israel. And it was perfectly appropriate and fitting in that context. This was the way that Naomi told Ruth to claim her kinsman redeemer. And the Hebrew word for kinsman redeemer is goel. So if you hear me say goel, that's what we're talking about, the kinsman redeemer. This morning we'll continue the story. I want to show you 3 things. Simple things, really. First, Ruth did what she was told to do. Second, she did more than she was told to do. And third, she got more than she expected from the whole process. Let's start with the idea that she did what she was told. We're looking at chapter 3 and verse 6. It says, Ruth went down to the floor, did according to all that her mother-in-law bade her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, his heart was merry. He went to lie down at the end of the heap of corn. She came softly and uncovered his feet and laid her down. Now, most commentaries suggest that this threshing floor was probably a community threshing floor. It wasn't just his private place. It would have been a flat spot somewhere, maybe on the side of the hill, maybe the top of the hill. And the reason the hill is important is because it needed to be someplace where there was a breeze. Because as they threw the grain up in the air, the breeze would carry off the chaff. Farmers would literally camp out in those threshing floors until it was all done and whatever they were threshing was safely put away. And that's why she was told to go there, because he'll be sleeping there to protect his grain. Now, it probably helps to understand in that context, at nighttime, it'll get really, really dark. You know, we have a problem in the United States called light pollution. Once in a while, you hear people kind of go off on that. And it's hard to find a place where it's really dark, because we've got so many electric lights and street lights and building lights that it never really gets dark for us. In fact, I saw a picture on the internet here a while back of the city of Phoenix. It was taken at nighttime, and the photographer was 50 miles away. Now, obviously, you don't see buildings from that distance, but there's this bright glow on the horizon of the Phoenix skyline. Well, 50 miles is a long way. That's about as far as from here to the Kansas City International Airport, and that's the problem of light pollution. They had no light pollution when this story was written. Unless there was a moon to light her way, then this would have been a really dark night. And the lights they had would have been torches or maybe little olive oil lamps. And once those were extinguished, it would really be dark. So Ruth goes to the threshing floor. She watches where Boaz is stretched out to spend the night. The lights are off. She slips in. She does exactly what she was told to do. She uncovers his feet, and she lays down at the ground of his feet, and she's waiting to see what will happen. First point is she did what she was told to do. Second thing is she did more than she was told to do. And this is verse 8. It says, "It came to pass at midnight, the man was afraid. He turned himself. Behold, a woman lay at his feet. And he said, Who art thou? She answered, I am Ruth, thy handmaid. Spread therefore thy skirt over thine handmaid, for thou art a near kinsman." Now, most of the newer translations, I know this translation that Tony read, don't say that he was scared. He was startled. Well, you would be too. He's sound asleep. It's that time of night when you're just really feeling good, and all of a sudden, you're startled. Your feet are cold. What's this about? And then you sense a presence. And then you smell this fragrance. And it's obvious to you that you're not the only one in this threshing floor, and there's a woman here. That would startle anybody. So in the dark he says, Who are you? And she says to him, I'm Ruth, your handmaid. Now I want to show you something about this word handmaid that you don't really see in the English translations. This is verse 9. She says, I am Ruth, thine handmaid. Spread therefore thy skirt over thine handmaid. Now, this is not the first time that Ruth has referred to herself as a handmaid. You'll see it again in chapter 2. So if you'll slip back to chapter 2 and verse 13, this is where she first met Boaz. She says to him, Let me find favor in thy sight, my Lord, for that thou hast comforted me, and for that thou hast spoken friendly unto thine handmaid. While the King James uses the word handmaid in both texts, the Hebrew is a different word. This first thing that she says to him, the Hebrew word is sapah, and that means a low-level slave. I'm just a low-level slave. When she approaches him on the threshing floor, she changes words. And the word she uses here is the Hebrew word amah, which means a high-level slave, and it can also mean someone who's eligible for marriage. Isn't that interesting? You know, when Abigail introduced herself to David, she said, I am Abigail, your amah. I'm eligible for marriage. And I don't think she was proposing to him there, but in fact, she did end up marrying David. So it just appears that through the progress of this story, Ruth's self-confidence is growing. When she first met him, she said, I'm just a lowly slave. And now she's at his threshing floor. She's getting ready actually to propose to him. And now she's not just that lowly slave. She's a servant, but she's a servant who's eligible for marriage. Now notice this expression. Verse 9 again, she says, Spread therefore thy skirt over thine handmaid. That's an odd expression to us, but its meaning would have been clear to Boaz. Because in the ancient world, a way a man showed his desire to marry a woman was to take the skirt, the corner of his robe. This would be really hard to do with pants, okay? They didn't wear pants, they wore robes. And he would lay the corner of his robe over the woman, and that, according to Ian de Guide's commentary, was the equivalent to giving her an engagement ring. That was saying, I want you to marry me. So when Ruth says, spread the skirt of your garment over me, it's more than just I'm cold. It's really a way of saying, I want you to marry me. Furthermore, that word skirt can also be translated, by the way, the Hebrew word skirt is the word kanap, and it can also be translated wing, as again I know this Tony's translation had. But I want to show you something else from chapter 2. Let me make sure I've got the right verse for us here. Ruth chapter 2 and verse 12. Boaz is talking to Ruth. He says, The Lord recompense thy work, and the full reward be given thee of the Lord God of Israel, unto whose wings thou art come to trust. Now, it just happens the word wings is also the Hebrew word kanaf. What Boaz is doing in this passage is he's asking God's blessing on Ruth. What he says is, may God spread his wing over you and protect you. In the text we're looking at today, Ruth says to Boaz, would you spread your wing over me? It's almost as if she's referring back to that first meeting where you asked that God would put his wing of protection over me. Now I'm asking you to be the answer to God's prayer and spread your wing over me and marry me. This is a clear proposal for marriage. We know that because that's exactly how Boaz interprets that. He knows that's exactly what she's asking him to do. What Ruth has done here is more than what Naomi said to do. What Naomi said was, go to the threshing floor, walk up to him, uncover his feet, lay down at his feet, and wait to hear what else he has to say. Ruth did that, but then she took it a step further and she said, Boaz, will you marry me? She did what she was told. She did more than she was told. And she really got more than she expected. And that's the third point of my message. Put yourself in Boaz's place for a moment. You're suddenly awakened in the middle of the night. You're aware of a woman sitting at the foot of your bed. And you say, who are you? And she says, I'm Ruth. Will you marry me? Oh my goodness. How do you respond to that? I might say, how dare you ask me that question? Or, who do you think you are? Or, get out of here, woman. What would people say if they knew you were here? Or, you've got to be kidding. That's the place that Boaz has found himself in. And you got to wonder if Ruth's heart wasn't just pounding really hard. Because she had no idea what this guy's going to say. This is just a clear, brazen proposal of marriage. Notice the first thing out of his mouth, verse 10. He said, blessed be thou of the Lord. You think maybe Ruth sighed a big sigh of relief? Whew. Okay, this isn't going so bad. I mean, that's a good sign. And then he goes on and he says this. Blessed be thou of the Lord, verse 10, my daughter, for thou hast showed more kindness in the latter end than at the beginning. Now look at that word kindness. Would anybody care to guess what Hebrew word that translates? Hesed. You've heard me talk about it a lot, haven't you? Hesed is that Hebrew word that has no equivalent in any other language. You take all of the positive attributes of God and roll them up in one word, and that's the word Hesed. When the person from whom I have a right to expect nothing gives me everything, that's Hesed. What Boaz is saying to Ruth is, you have demonstrated Hesed, kindness. But notice the specifics. You've shown more kindness in the latter end than at the beginning. How did she show kindness at the beginning? And what is the kindness she's showing now? Well, let's let Boaz answer that question. Back to chapter 2 and verse 11. Boaz is speaking to Ruth, and remember this is their first meeting. Verse 11, Boaz answers and said to Ruth, it has been fully shown me all that you have done to your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. How you left your father and your mother. You left the land of your nativity. You came to a people which thou knewest not hitherto or hitherfore. I've heard all about you, Ruth. When your husband died, you could have stayed in Moab. And you could have said to Naomi, have a nice trip. And nobody would have blamed you for doing that. Instead, you devoted yourself to her care. Naomi had no right to expect anything from you, and yet you gave her everything. You left your home, you left your family, you followed her here. And when she didn't want to go out to reap, you willingly came to my fields. You winnowed and threshed the grain that you gathered here. You took it back to Naomi. You shared it with her. You've been showing hesed to your mother-in-law since the day your husband died. In the past, your kindness, your hesed, has been great. But Boaz was looking more than just the past. Back to our text, verse 10 of chapter 3. You showed more kindness in the latter end than at the beginning. You showed lots of kindness at the beginning of the story. But the kindness that you're showing now is surpassing that kindness. What's the kindness? Well, she just asked Boaz to marry her. That's the kindness. That was an extension of her hesed. So where's the kindness there? And again, Boaz answers the question for us. Keep reading in verse 10. He says, you showed more kindness in the latter end than at the beginning, inasmuch as you didn't follow young men, whether poor or rich. Now this is the verse that makes us think that Boaz was probably significantly older than Ruth. So I think there's reason to believe that Ruth was 20-something, and that's probably a fairly accurate guess. I have no idea how old Boaz was. Assuming he was about the age of Naomi, then he was 40-something, maybe early 50s, and that's just a guess, an assumption. But it's clear from this text that he's a good bit older than Ruth. Now, how many 20-something-year-old women do you know who want to marry a 40-something-year-old man? See, if Ruth is seeking a husband for her own benefit, she may have found someone closer to her own age. If Ruth was seeking a husband for her benefit, she might have found someone that she really loved. And that's kind of implied in, you could have married a poor man. Well, why do women marry poor men? Well, it's because they're in love with them. You could have married for love. If she was seeking a husband for her benefit, she might have found a wealthy man who could take care of her. See, the point of this is, in asking me to marry you, what Boaz knows is she is not just doing it for her own benefit. She is doing it for the benefit of another, and that other is her mother-in-law. You remember when Ruth and Naomi started out from Moab to return to Bethlehem. Along the way, Ruth says to Naomi, thy people shall be my people, and thy God shall be my God. You remember that commitment? We said that was her conversion. She embraced Israel's God. She did so fully. Because according to the God of Israel, if a man dies before he and his wife have a male heir to carry on the name, she is not supposed to marry outside of the family. She must marry one of her dead husband's brothers and raise up a son in the name of her former husband. That's what the law said that she has now embraced, and that is what she's endeavoring to do in this story. Now, I don't know what kind of feelings Ruth had for Boaz. The text never says. You read some commentaries, especially the smaller commentaries, and this is just a great love story. And maybe it is. But there's nothing said about that here. I mean, she may have been head over heels in love with this man. I don't know. What I do know is that as she was approaching him for marriage, she wasn't doing so primarily for her benefit. Will she benefit from this? Well, of course she will. But that's not what's driving her. What's driving her is that her husband's family name is about to die out because the males are all dead. The only way that family name can be carried on is if she marries someone within the family and has a son to carry on the name. And in the process of doing that, she would also secure someone who would take care of Naomi for the rest of her life. So I think Ruth's perspective on Boaz was that if she didn't love him already, she could learn to love him. She could make this work. But she isn't driven by infatuation or love. She's driven to take care of her mother-in-law and her family's name. This is hesed. This is kindness. When you're willing to marry somebody not because you're in love with them, but because it's the right thing to do and will benefit others, I don't know how you get anything more hesed than that. That is true kindness. Notice what else Boaz says to Ruth, verse 11. Now, my daughter, fear not. I will do to thee all that thou requirest. For all the city of my people doth know that thou art a virtuous woman. All of Bethlehem knows that you're a virtuous woman. How long has Ruth been in Bethlehem? Well, I can give you a good guess. I know she showed up at the beginning of the barley harvest. So we know it was late April, early May. And I know that the story we're looking at now takes place while Boaz is threshing his wheat. So the barley came on first, and then came the wheat. So this is probably 6, 7, or 8 weeks. Let's just go with the longest number. She's been in town for about 8 weeks. And everyone in Bethlehem knows that you are a virtuous woman after 8 weeks. How did this outsider, how did this foreigner, how did this Moabite woman gain that kind of reputation in that short amount of time? Well, the answer is pretty simple. She didn't live for herself. She lived for others. That's the answer. She was a woman of kindness. She was a woman of hesed. She was one who was doing what would benefit other people. She was the living embodiment of Philippians chapter 2. Verse 3 says, let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind let each esteem other better than themselves. Look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others. In other words, don't be so concerned about yourself. Be concerned about others. Ruth did not earn a reputation for kindness by consciously trying to earn a reputation for kindness. She earned a reputation for kindness by being kind. That's the best way, isn't it? She just demonstrated hesed. She inconvenienced herself for the convenience of others. And everybody in Bethlehem knows what kind of woman she is. I wonder if there's a message in that for us today. And what might that message be? Well, maybe Paul summarized it in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 32. He said, be ye kind one to another. That's the message. We have the demonstration from Ruth. She shows us how it's done. It's by being more concerned about others than for ourselves. By being kind. Now, the message is, go forth and do likewise this week. Let's pray together. Father, I thank you for this marvelous woman, this Ruth. What a remarkable story. She took this woman out of the paganism of the worship of Chemosh and Moab, and you transformed her heart, made her new, and gave her a heart of kindness for others. For she's even willing to marry a man not for her own benefit, but for the benefit of others. Father, may that resonate in our hearts and minds this week. And may we follow that same example and give our lives to demonstrating kindness. For Jesus' sake and in his name, amen.